guys, it's Jillian and Nolan here. He's trying to take a nap, but I wanted to try and share his birth story today and get that up because it has been far too long. And I am sorry it has taken this long. Life with a newborn has been crazy, but on top of that, our dog had hip surgery, and he has been requiring a lot of care. So I just haven't had time to sit down and actually make this video. Here goes nothing, and I'm going to try to film as many as I can while Nolan is napping here. So I was due November 15th, and my due date came and went, and nothing, not even close to happening. I was expected to be late anyway. My sister was late with all three of her kids. My mom was late with all three of her kids. So we were expecting me to be at least 7 to 10 days late. So a week goes by. It's a week past my due date, and nothing's really happening. But then that night I started having some contractions that were more than Braxton Hicks. And I got really excited, and then, 4, 5, 6 o'clock rolled around in the morning, and they kind of fizzled out, and I was able to go to sleep, and it was like nothing had happened. So I spent the rest of that day trying to get things started again. So I went for a long walk. I sat on the birth ball. I just really tried to get things moving, and nothing happened. So I then, went about my business, and that night I started having contractions again. This went on for 4 nights, where they would start around 6, 7 o'clock at night and go until 5 or 6 in the morning, and then they'd completely stop. On the 4th night, my nightly contractions, I lost my mucus plug, or started losing my mucus plug. So I got really excited thinking, maybe this is going to happen, it's got to happen at some point. So maybe this is it. I know losing your mucus plug is not a definite sign that labor is starting, but it was different, and it was exciting, and my contractions were getting stronger. However, I texted my midwife, and she said, if this is labor, you need to rest. So you either need to take a long shower and see if that'll slow them down or let you rest, or you can take some Benadryl. I didn't want to take a shower at 3 or 4 in the morning, so I took a Benadryl, and about half an hour later, I fell asleep, and the contractions stopped. That happened for 2 more nights. Still no labor. Stopping 4, 5, 6 in the morning every night. So I went to my midwife appointment on the Tuesday before he was born, and everything was good, so we kept going. And then the Friday after Thanksgiving, I had another appointment that was like penciled in, because they were sure that I was going to have the baby by then. So I was now almost 42 weeks pregnant, 42 weeks and 6 days pregnant. And I went to the midwife appointment. She was ironically late. There was a miscommunication between her and the other midwife, my second call midwife, on who was going to be doing that appointment. Luckily, they were obviously nearby because they were on call in case I did go into labor. So it was just about 15-20 minutes late for my appointment. And we went in, we did our normal talk, and she listened to the baby. And at that point, she told me to turn on my side, and I got a little bit concerned. And she said, his heart rate dipped a little bit. It went down to 108, which is not super low. However, as a midwife, they err on the side of caution. And when it dipped down, it then spiked into the 170s. So she was concerned. But I was on my back, and I was nearly 42 weeks pregnant. So it's kind of normal for them to not tolerate being on your back very well. So I turned on my side, and then everything was fine. However, at 42 weeks pregnant, they wanted me to have an NST. So the plan was that I would go on Monday to get an NST. But with that drop in his heart rate, she wanted me to go and get the NST right then. Just to make sure, and an NST, in case you don't know, is a non-stress test. Just to make sure that everything's okay in there and that we are okay to keep going. At this point, I would be getting NSTs every couple days, and basically trying to stay really on top of kick counts that kind of thing, to make sure that he's okay in there. However, it was Black Friday, and the independent imaging places that would do the NST were closed. So we had to go to the hospital. And being 42 weeks pregnant, we knew that they were going to recommend that I get induced. So we went, strictly saying, we just want information. We'll decide when we get the results of this. So after, waiting a little while, I got the NST. They were not happy with how he looked in there. My fluid was getting low, which we knew, my midwife could tell. And, being 42 weeks pregnant, the risk of, stillbirth at that point goes up a little bit. So they were advising that I get induced. However, his heart rate looked good. He looked fine. There was still fluid in there. So, they said, basically, it's up to you. And at that point, we talked to my midwife again, and everyone was kind of comfortable if I was paying really good attention to kick counts, because I had been getting decent ones. He was very active in there. That if I paid attention, that if it hadn't happened by Monday, I would get induced. So while they were getting the paperwork ready to, let me go on my own, they had kept me on the monitor, and his heart rate dropped again. Same exact thing that happened with the midwife, and it only happened twice in 3 hours, maybe even 4 hours. And once was with my midwife, and one was right before they took me off the monitor. So we had the doctor come look again. We said, his heart rate did that thing again. Can you please look and tell us what you think? So they looked, and they said, honestly, at this point, if you were to leave, you would be leaving it against medical advice, and we would need you to sign paperwork. And we talked to my midwife again, and we all decided that we were not comfortable leaving the hospital at that point. I needed to be induced, and we needed to get him out. He was telling us he was ready, and, he wasn't happy in there anymore. And we didn't have time to wait for my body to get going on that. It was around 6 o'clock. I got admitted to the hospital, which is about an hour away from our house. But we did have the option to go to a different hospital at that point. We could have gone closer to home. However, the hospitals close to us do not have a NICU. And at this point, with him being slightly distressed, he was not in critical distress by any means. With him being in distress, my midwife suggested that it would be a lot better if we stayed, because they had a NICU. So if we needed it, God forbid, in the event, that it was there. If we had gone to a different hospital that did not have a NICU, they would fly him to the nearest hospital that did. And I would not be going until I was ready, until I was discharged from the hospital. So that was not an option for me. I wanted to be in the same hospital with my baby at all times. So my natural birth center birth was not happening, and I did have some tears about it, but I felt very confident that we made the right decision, that he was telling us that he needed to come out and he needed help. And especially the fact that my midwife was late for the appointment, and that we heard his heart rate do that in such a short amount of time, it was definitely a sign, and it was, 100% the right thing to do. So by the time we got to a room, got hooked up, they started me on Pitocin, got me on all the monitors. I was still going to attempt a natural delivery. However, I am not stupid, and I know contractions on Pitocin are a whole other animal. So I consented to, get an epidural if I asked for it. But I wanted to see how long I could go, if I needed one. But I was not trying to be a hero at that point. I know Pitocin is no joke. And it is no joke. Literally minutes after they started me at a 6 the first time, which is 6 strips per hour. And they were going to up it every 20 minutes. So I'm pretty sure they doubled it every 20 minutes. So they came in 20 minutes later. He wasn't tolerating it great, but he wasn't doing terrible. He being Nolan, the baby. I was having contractions on my own, and he wasn't really tolerating them. fantastic, but he wasn't in the danger zone. So they upped my Pitocin after 20 minutes, and I believe they may have upped it one more time. But then Nolan really started to be in distress. So they shut it off, gave me an hour off of it, and they said they were going to start again, lower and slower, and see if they could get him to tolerate it enough for me to dilate. So, back it up a little bit. On my appointment on Tuesday before he was born, I was checked and I was at a 2, a generous 2. Generous being my midwife, not me. I was like a 1.5, close to a 2. So they checked me when I got there. I hadn't dilated anymore. He wasn't tolerating the higher dose of Pitocin, and they were having trouble keeping him on the belly monitor. So they recommended that I get an internal monitor, and they were going to try to break my water to try and get things moving along faster. So they put the monitor in, and they broke my water, but nothing really came out because I didn't have a good pocket of fluid. So that wasn't really that big of a deal, but my water had been broken, and I was now being monitored, he was now being monitored internally. So I was basically, at this point, since he was not tolerating labor as it was, I was on my left side on the hospital bed, and I was not allowed to move off of the bed. So I'm in labor, not able to move around, and hooked up to an IV, hooked up to Pitocin. Definitely not what I was wanting. But with him being in slight distress, you know, I was doing what I needed to. However, when they turned the Pitocin back on after an hour, I was having contractions on my own that were relatively painful at that point. So then adding Pitocin again, they got intense very quickly. I was shaking really bad, and I was stuck. I couldn't move to, you know, get in a better position. I couldn't get comfortable. I was stuck on my left side in that hospital bed, and it was the most uncomfortable bed in the world. So after a couple hours, it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning at this point, I had been begging for an epidural at this point. The contractions were so intense and there was so much pressure. I felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside, basically. And I decided with my doula and my husband that, you know, I was not able to relax through that, and I was not going to be able to dilate if I couldn't relax. So getting an epidural at that point was necessary. I don't know how long it took for the anesthesiologist to actually get in there, but it felt like forever. Once you decide to get an epidural, you want it right then. And people had told me that, and I was prepared, but when you are in the midst of it, you know, I was cussing people out. I was not a good patient. However, he finally came, gave me my epidural, and he was the nicest person in the world. You know, he was so nice, and he did such a good job. I didn't have any adverse reaction to the epidural. It did not hurt. I mean, granted, compared to Pitocin contractions, I don't think anything would have hurt me as much. But it quickly took effect, you know, almost immediately. Within 20 minutes, I was fully numb. I was happy on my left side, you know. But then the nurses came in. Literally 20 minutes after I got my epidural, they told me that he was no longer tolerating contractions, and it was getting worrisome. I was not dilating. They checked me. I was only a 3. So I was not dilating enough. He was not tolerating, and our best move at that point was to have a C-section. Immediately, it was immediately. It wasn't an emergency, but it was urgent. So while that was scary to go through that and have them tell me that, it was not a question in my mind that, you know, that's what we needed to do. So they prepped me. They upped my epidural more so that it was, you know, nice and strong, couldn't feel anything, which thank goodness I got it when I did. because if not, I may have had to be knocked out or had a different option, like a spinal or something, which may not have been as good for me. The epidural was fantastic. They got me in to the OR probably within 30 minutes of them deciding that a C-section was necessary. So, I mean, it was pretty quick and everything happened pretty quickly. So then I'm in the OR, my husband's getting ready, and, you know, they're upping my medication and doing tests to make sure I can't feel anything. And they didn't tell me that they started. And, you know, I guess the anesthesiologist was talking to me, and randomly he looks at me and goes, "So you can't feel what they're doing, huh?" I go, "No." He said, "Well, they started." And I was like, "Well, where's my husband?" Apparently they don't let them in right away, necessarily, in situations where, you know, a C-section is kind of imperative. So he came in before they were even ready to pull out the baby. But I guess while he was getting ready, they got started because it takes a little while. So he comes in, he sits next to me. He wanted to he watched me get the epidural and he was fine. And he wanted to watch the C-section, but they wouldn't let him because they didn't want anyone passing out in the OR. But it seemed like forever once I knew they had started working. C-sections take a long time, and I did not know this. And I kept, you know, asking, "Are they getting close? Are they getting close?" And they were getting closer. But eventually they said, okay, they're getting ready to pull him out. And I've watched videos of people talking about their C-sections, and they say, "Oh, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of pressure." There's a lot of pressure, but it's not necessarily the pressure that you expect. It was the doctor pushing on my rib cage, trying to get him out because he was a little bit stuck in there, which just reaffirms the fact that I needed a C-section. She, the doctor, was pushing on my ribs, and she goes, "Oh, there's going to be some pressure." I was like, "Yeah, but those are my ribs," and it hurt so bad. Oh, I thought she was going to break my ribs, trying to get him out from under them, because he was a very large baby. Trying to get him out from under my ribs and pushing on them, trying to get him out of me. And, you know, eventually they did. And they said, "He's out." No, they said, "The baby's out." Mind you, I forgot to mention, we didn't know that he was a boy at the time. We were going out, we were Team Green, we did not know. And before I had gone in, I had, you know, reminded them, you know, can my husband still say if it's a boy? So as soon as the baby came out, the doctor said, "Nobody say what it is, it's a surprise." So thankfully she had remembered and said something so that nobody said a word, and they were working on him for a little while. It took what felt like forever. It was probably only a few seconds, but it took forever to hear him cry, and then he did, and my husband and I started crying. Sorry. And he came out and let out the most beautiful cry. And now he's snoring. So he came out and he let out a cry, and my husband and I started crying, and that's our baby, you know. And it took a few minutes before they let my husband go over to even see him. They wanted to make sure he was okay. I heard them talking, and his first APGAR score was a 7. So it wasn't great, and I heard them say meconium, so there was meconium in there. So they were a little concerned for him. But eventually they cleaned him up, they got him going. He was, you know, crying, and they let my husband go over, and he said, "It's a boy." And I said, "I knew it," because I totally knew it was a boy the whole time. You know, from very early on, I knew he was a boy, and we decided on his name. And, you know, I wasn't sold on our girl's name because his name was Nolan. You know, I knew this. And he was telling me about him when he was over there, and he was, you know, he had a cone head because he was stuck, and they assured me it would go down. And then, so they were stitching me back up, putting me back together, and they brought him over to me, and he was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I just couldn't believe that that was my baby, you know. It's the most amazing feeling. And they took a picture of it, and I will insert some pictures at the end of this. So they brought him over to me. He was beautiful. I fell in love with him instantly. But they were concerned for him, so they did want to bring him up to the NICU for observation. And they quickly took him away. My husband, he is snoring. Can you breathe in there? So my husband went with him for a little bit while they stitched me up and put me back together. So he got to hang out with him while they observed him in the NICU, which thankfully we were in a hospital with a NICU because otherwise they would have taken him. And then, you know, it took forever for them to finish me. But the anesthesiologist was there, and he was so nice and talking to me, telling me about his twin boys that he has, and, you know, congratulations on your baby, he's beautiful, you know. And some nurses came in a couple times and said he's doing good, so that I wasn't concerned. But it probably took a half hour, 45 minutes for them to finish. He was born on November 29th at 4:18 in the morning. So I'm not sure when I got back to my room, but luckily my doula was there still. So she was there to, you know, keep me company and talk to me, and because my husband was still with Nolan. And, you know, we tried to get some sleep, but that wasn't going to happen. I was hopped up on adrenaline, and I was still shaking from all the Pitocin and the anesthesia, and, you know, I just had a baby. And my husband was sending me pictures from the NICU, so I could see him, you know. It's because I only saw him for, it felt like 30 seconds. He said it was probably 5 minutes, but I don't think it was at all. So then eventually my husband came down. They were keeping Nolan for a few more hours, and they said at 8 o'clock we could go see him. They wanted me to get up there and see him, which I was not sure how that was going to happen. I just had a C-section, but so we tried to nap. They moved me to my postpartum room, my recovery room, and that bed was so much more comfortable, thank goodness. And then 8 o'clock rolled around, and I called my nurses, and I was like, so they want me to go up to the NICU, and I'm not sure that's going to happen, but they brought a wheelchair for me. I was able to move from the bed to the wheelchair, and they brought me up there. My husband wheeled me in, and it was surreal. I mean, granted, he was doing fine. He was just under the lights, and he had monitors on him, but he wasn't, you know, on a ventilator or anything. So we were very lucky, but he was 9 pounds, 9 ounces, and 21.5 inches long. And he was the biggest newborn in the NICU. Of course he was, because he was, you know, 2 weeks late. And he was just beautiful, and he was the sweetest thing in the world. He still is, obviously. But, yeah, it was amazing seeing him.